Three, two, one, liftoff.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.
David Miller, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Kevin, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man, the pleasure's all mine. I want to first start by thanking you and the FlowGardens team for that very thoughtful care package, man. I would have product to show that you sent, but I already consumed it all. It was so good. And I mean, I had never seen a branded chillum before. So how cool is that, man? That's a pretty awesome product.
Yeah, well, thank you. We the fact that you don't have it display is even better. So I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I love the flowers that you got me. One was a hybrid and the other was a sativa. I don't know the exact strain. I wasn't sure of what it was exactly, but man, I mean the terpene profile, the smell, everything just tasted great. And then I really, like I said, enjoyed that chillum and then the pre-roll. I think it was like a fruit punch or something that you sent me with the pre-roll. So yeah, overall, man, I'm a big fan of Flow Garden and what you all are doing. And it made me think because I know that y'all are operating in the state of Tennessee, which doesn't have legal recreation or medical, right? So you're kind of in that blurred line where Texas kind of sits, although Texas does have a medical program. It's very limited, right? So
Yeah.
I'm just like, curious just to start, like, what's it like operating in the state of Tennessee as a hemp forward company, right? And what are you seeing any pushback in terms of legislation? I mean, are they cracking down on various cannabinoids like they are here in Texas?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the kind of state of affairs that Tennessee is, it's essentially legal in states all around us, from Kentucky to our north to Alabama, Mississippi to our south, and Missouri to our west. And I think it's kind of moving through North Carolina and South Carolina, although it's not approved there. And so there's some crazy things going on in Georgia, even though it's been approved for like 2 years medicinally there. But yeah, it's all around us. And the silver lining that we've come to find in starting and being in the hemp space is that we've been able to expand and strengthen our genetics with these alternative cannabinoids, CBC, CBG, CBDV, all the laundry list of them, because we are restricted in the amount of THC Delta 9 that's allowed in the flowers. So it's really been a blessing in disguise as far as long-term building out our genetics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're kind of getting at the forefront because that 2018 Farm Bill was passed, right? So it gives you the freedom to experiment on the minor cannabinoids and whatnot. You're still regulated in terms of that 0.3 threshold for THC, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And people come into our facility, which is an R&D facility. We have 4 different main grow methods, and they think which we are in part a CBD company, and they come in and they see these plants and they're like, this looks like marijuana to me. I'm like, welcome to the cannabis world. This is what CBD and other things come from.
Right, yeah, and they smell it and they're like, yeah, this smells like cannabis. It looks like like what is going on here? And what I've always been fascinated about, especially here in Texas, is the marketing, right? Like I still haven't wrapped my head around like how we've come, which is a good thing. I'm not complaining, but like I'm seeing more bold marketing in terms of like, using THC, using Delta 9, these terms on the packaging, in posts or different marketing materials. Why is that? How is that working?
Well, there are some hemp-derived cannabinoids that cause psychoactive effects, like Delta 8. There's even hemp-derived Delta 9. So that's been an eye-opener to most everyone in the industry, that these non-THC dominant cannabinoids can have, which the Delta 8 and Delta 9 hemp-derived are, come from CBD. So it's been a surprise, and there's been a lot of people that market just that Delta 8 for the psychoactive effects of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And are you seeing like that probably is something that's trending within the state of Tennessee, Delta 8, HHC? Are there any others that you're kind of seeing that are either emerging or that are really getting some traction?
Yeah, this is just speculation, but a lot of those, I guess you could call them somewhat synthetic cannabinoids because they do have to be processed for them um, to get to market. So a lot of those, I think it's just a fad until a lot of these rules are established with uniformity across all the different states and federally.
Right.
Then I think this is kind of just like a short-term patch in the market. So until things, like I said, normalize.
Yeah, and it's so
And
funny,
that'll
right?
be
Right, and you sit back and you're like, if the federal government would just understand, or even, the state of Tennessee's government would understand that the more prohibition leads to more synthetic emergence of these cannabinoids, right? Which in some cases or in most cases aren't properly tested, right? There might be chemicals or pesticides or mycotoxins, whatever it is that are in there that are harmful. So in a way, prohibition is really hurting not only the industry, right? The legal hemp industry within states like Tennessee and Texas, but it's also potentially harmful in terms of the consumers who are ingesting these products.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and that's a whole new can of worms that's been opened because the regulation around these alternative cannabinoids, Delta 8 as an example, there's very little. So you go into, a smoke shop or a head shop or even a gas station, the standardization with dosing, the standardization with packaging, like all that, it presents a lot of risk, whether it's with children getting access to them, or if it's someone who's not a child and they don't really understand how the dosing works.
Right.
So, and if you don't have to have these certificate of analysis as proof, then like unfortunately there are bad players in most all markets. So that can cause some uncomfortable situations. But Tennessee has just passed a law for regulation and with these alternative cannabinoids because there's already been some things that have happened around them. So we'll see.
Right. Hey, and a company like FlowGardens is so perfectly positioned because you didn't really double down on the alternative cannabinoids. It doesn't seem like, right? I mean, I see a lot of companies here in Texas that have pivoted just because the demand for Delta 8 is so high that, we gotta focus on Delta 8, and that becomes somewhat encompassing of their entire brand. And then to your point, right, once that switch happens, inevitably they're going to have to rework their whole business model.
Yeah, and we've been one of the fortunate cultivators, one of the very few. I mean, we pride ourselves in having the highest quality flower. We won the High Times Hemp Cup last year and also the coveted Emerald Cup. And so our sales are doing great and expanding as the consumers educated on these alternative cannabinoids, but it hasn't been the case for, a lot of other companies. Like you said, they've had to adapt and change. We still have to adapt and change as these laws are continually being adjusted and amended. So yeah, it's the wild west out there in a sense.
It really is. Yeah. I want to talk to you specifically about how FlowGardens is leading and in growing, right? And how you're really focusing on expanding the science and the understanding of CBD genetics. Talk to me about your process and how you kind of go about that approach.
So we have, as Ed mentioned, we have 4 different grow methods that we're R&Ding. We have living soil. Then the other 3 are hydroponic methods, and that's top drip. So there's tubes going into Rockwell or cocoa coir cubes, flood and drain. And then we have a deep water culture system. So there's water continually circulating in like a medialess format where the roots are just in the water. And what we found is that with the deep water culture system, the cannabinoid levels and percentages are quite a bit higher when we use that method. And
And
you
why
know,
is
it's a
that?
lot of
That's curious, right? Like, why are you seeing that happen? I mean, I've seen it firsthand where what do you call it again? The deep water culture? Is that what you said?
huh? Yep.
Yeah, I've seen that firsthand, and it's amazing to see because, like, to your point, you've got this constant flow of water. The roots are sitting in that water. So you're saying that method accentuates these cannabinoids and these terpenes?
Yes, that's what we're finding, Kevin, and we think there's a lot of research that we still need to dissect, but we think one of the main reasons is for that is we're able to regulate the proper amount of nutrients um, that the plant gets from when it starts as a clone all the way to whenever it's almost ready to be harvested. So changing those nutrient levels given the cycle is really allows us to dial in on how the plant grows.
And I would imagine like the room for error in that method is like little to none, right? I mean, you have to be. I mean, you use the word dialed in, so any nutrient levels that are off or too much water, I don't know. I mean, how that would all kind of play in part in the overall finished product, right?
Yeah, all those components, and then you also have the amount of CO2 in the room, the temperature of the room, the humidity of the room. It's definitely a lab in there every day.
Well, and you talked about living soil, and for those that are watching or listening that may not be familiar with living soil, what exactly is that?
So we have beneficial bugs that are in the room. You know, there are other plants that are in the soil. Actually, when our team harvests the living soil room, we cut the stalk and we leave the roots in there, and those naturally degrade and stay in the soil. So we're recycling that as we use it,
And
and
that,
sometimes go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
And sometimes we even experiment with some myco components, mushrooms within the soil to see how that helps.
And is that method aligned with what I've heard in the past in that like if you ever wanted to grow, say, an organic garden, you would first plant hemp because the roots of the hemp plant suck up all the CO2 and the mycotoxins, the heavy metals, pesticides, etc. So is that the same type of concept that you're leaving those roots in to kind of enrich the soil for the next planting?
Yep, exactly. That's a great way to put it.
Awesome. Yeah. And so the four different methods that you talked about, I would imagine that it really is dictated by the strain that you're growing.
Yeah,
Or
so our founder is just a genius when it comes to cultivation, Eric Melzer, and the genetics of CBD and non-marijuana with less than 0.3% have just advanced so much in the past 5 years that we're trying out so many different strains in our rooms, and there's really not enough room space for trying out all these strains. So we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different strains that we're testing and then back crossing and creating new ones. One, to find new cannabinoids. Two, to find better structured plants and plants that grow better. So um, it's like I said, it's constantly kind of like a mad scientist lab in our facility because there's so many different moving parts with these strains. But to directly answer your question, yeah, if we find a strain, purple haze, and it does really well in the deep water culture, then we're prone to, if it's a popular purchase item for our customers and they like it, then we're prone to grow it in that method versus, living soil or another method.
interesting. Yeah. Sounds like a lot of R&D, a lot of trial and error, I mean, you gotta plant it to see how it responds, right, in these different methods. So it's amazing that y'all are doing that, and doing it with so many different genetics at one time is pretty incredible. I want to switch gears and talk to you about your specific role. I know that your title is Chief Strategy Officer of FlowGardens. And so, tell me a little bit about your side of the house, what you're responsible for, what you're focused on. And then more broadly, we can just talk about, the advantages and disadvantages of the hemp market compared to legal cannabis.
Yeah. So my role is strategy and strategy and execution of that strategy. And with us being, a small company, we're north of 7 figures in revenue, and we've grown substantially over the past several years. But my job is to do as much research, make sure that we're doing as much research as possible as the market begins to develop with all these alternative cannabinoids, and really educate the consumer and educate our industry peers on the direction of the marketplace. So whenever we get a plant like skunk butter is one of them. It's a collaboration that our founder worked with one of the genetic companies out of Colorado. It has 4% CBC. So making sure that not only we're incorporating the use of that CBC with our customer base, but also furthering the research and development around that, and how do we cross those CBC plants with a CBG plant or a CBD plant or something like that. So we have a lab and a tissue culture system in addition to our seed bank to make sure that all this data is properly stored and managed and interpreted, so we can continue to move our genetics forward.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll, in addition to what we're doing internally to make sure we're moving that forward as far as the genetics development, it's just going to conferences and speaking at them, and educating a lot of people about the alternative cannabinoids. People are familiar with the term CBD, or most people are, but when you start mentioning some of these other ones, they're just not aware of it. They don't know that CBG is also a non-psychoactive cannabinoid that helps to fight cancer, helps to fight pain inflammation. It's actually an agonist on the CB1 receptor, which is a psychoactive component, unlike CBC. So it's just really education, consumer education, and also industry peer education. And to transition into your second question, how do we kind of clearly separate all the noise with the term marijuana and the term hemp? Like, what does that actually mean? The simplest way that I've learned to do that is kind of the overarching term that applies to everything is cannabis. Cannabis can be hemp, cannabis can be marijuana, but hemp can't be marijuana, marijuana can't be hemp. And that's just because that's the way the government has designated it.
Right.
So if you have medical or recreational use of marijuana in any of the states, then it has over 0.3% THC. And that's really the line that's been drawn by the regulators and the government in the sand of the difference between hemp and marijuana. That's the only thing. So you can have a plant that has both THC or THCA and CBD or those other cannabinoids that I mentioned. And technically it's hemp and marijuana because it's got both of them. But it's over 0.3. Technically it has to be labeled as marijuana. So it's
it makes
it's a little bit confusing.
Yeah, and it makes the cultivators job really difficult. I mean, I would imagine, because naturally the cannabis or even the hemp plant has THC in it, right? I mean, we just we distinguish the two, hemp 0.3 or less, but if you're just looking at cannabis, THC is naturally in it, and it's used as a defense mechanism for the plant, right? To kind of protect itself from the sun. So we're having to defy science to be legal to remain compliant, which, hey, you guys are doing an amazing job, because in turn, it seems like we're learning a lot more about these minor cannabinoids, and not doubling down so much on the THC, which other markets obviously are doing, right?
Yeah, and that's really where we feel like our as the market begins to develop and customers become more educated, we really have a head start, because you go to some of these states like California, Colorado, Washington, that where it's been legal for a longer period of time, a lot of the dispensaries are shooting for the mid to high 20s in the percentage for the percentage THC. And you look at the terpene level, and you also look at those other cannabinoids like CBD, they're essentially non-existent. Whereas the plants that we're growing, they have upwards of 4 and even 5% terpenes, which is unheard of in these other markets. You'll be lucky to get maybe 1 or 2% terpene levels. And maybe you'll find a CBD strain in some of these dispensaries, but typically it's difficult to find.
Yeah, I think it's such a fad too. It's market immaturity, right? I think at this point, like seeking the high THC potency, it'll dwindle away, right? I think as consumers become more educated around, hey, you can even get a stronger high or a better effect if the terpene profile is on point, or there's flavonoids in there that really marry with the cannabinoids and the terpenes. So it'll just be over time, right? It's not like, and this example has come up many times, you don't go in the alcohol store or the liquor store and say, hey, I want 100 proof of whatever you got, 100%. Like, it's, you go based off of the liquor that you're wanting, and then from there it's the brand and so on, right?
Yeah, and I don't like using. Sorry, I try and restrain from using the alcohol as a comparison, but it's so easy and relatable to people, so I do it.
Right. Because there's no
like,
similarity at all between cannabis and alcohol, because one's a poison, the other we have receptors that bind to this plant. So I get that, yeah. But I mean, it's kind of true, right? It's like,
yeah, it's like the example that I use, that I say I try not to, but I do anyway. It's like people don't run into the liquor store and everybody's grabbing moonshine, which is the THC 30% plus plants.
right.
They want something a little more balanced. And whenever you take a look at what kind of effects do you want when you use this plant, whether they're medicinal and or recreational benefits, it's like you don't have to be blasted off to the moon with this 30% THC plant. You can have 10% THC, 10% CBD, and a couple percent of the others, and then get one with a really high terpene level too. Your experience, your calmness, and the overall effects of that plant that has a more balanced approach, it feels so much better. Not just for me personally, but all our customers. We have 15,000-ish customers that we've so they're starting to follow us and have bought from us over the past 2.5 so years, and they love the effects of all the balanced cannabinoids.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And when I think about my own experience, like, let's take, going back to the synthetic cannabinoid discussion, like Delta 8, right? Like, I've consumed Delta 8 before, and it's such a different experience and high. To me, it's like a dumb, dull, I'm high, and there's kind of nothing else, right? It's like I'm blasted and I'm just sitting there, and I'm kind of just, I'm there. If it's high potency THC from like a legal dispensary, obviously there are other minor cannabinoids in it. There's other terpenes, but it kind of can be a bit overwhelming, right? If you're dealing with all that, and it may impair your ways to function, or so there's kind of that. But to your point, if there's a good balance and a good mix, which I experienced smoking FlowGarden's flower, I really enjoyed it. It's not too extreme, it's not too intense, it's kind of right on the level. It's a clear high where it's thought-provoking, you're able to engage in conversation. And so I think, again, like, it's just kind of experience, education. Y'all are doing that, it sounds like, very heavily. That you mentioned you're going to conferences and talking about these minor cannabinoids. How is that education being received? I mean, are people shocked when they hear, like, wait a second, it doesn't have to be THC dominant to to still give me that same effect?
Yeah, it's I'd like to say everybody's taking it in and promoting it and things are moving along fast, but that's really not the case. We're and I do think this is going to change, Kevin, but we're kind of like the redheaded stepchild. Nobody really wants to hear about CBD or CBG right now. The whole market's still excited that there's 24-ish rec states approved and 40 plus medicinal states, and they want safe banking to be passed, which I do, which I do as well. So we're kind of in the background, but we're just going to continue to educate our customers and consumers out there, and we think that the cream will rise to the top.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, consistency, quality always wins, right? Hard work. It's just this we're in a time game right now. It's a marathon, not a sprint, and we're gonna see who lasts at the end of this race. And but hearing you talk and present that example, especially the example of like the redheaded stepchild, it makes sense. But I also think, like, from my own experience, like, I have my father, for instance, and uncles where they just like are pretty hesitant to smoke products of today because they're so potent, so strong, right? My dad's gotten a little more comfortable with it, which is cool, but I could see a real opportunity for a company like FlowGardens to really target maybe the older generation that wants to get back into consuming, but not jump in head first, right, with 28 to 30% THC products. So do you foresee at some point in the future kind of a separation in terms of the consumer base and who FlowGardens will serve, as opposed to some of the retail operators in adult use states?
Yeah, what we're seeing is from a lot of these rec states, like I mentioned, in California, Colorado, Washington, etc., we're getting a lot of orders and traction of our flower sales.
Mm-hmm.
And they can clearly go to a dispensary down the road and get THC flower.
Right.
And we believe one of the reasons for them, purchasing from us and online and us shipping it to them, which we can do to, I think it's like 49 states we can ship to, is because whenever you throw that CBD into the mix, even if you have a higher THC plant, if you mix it with the CBD flower, then that anxiety that a lot of people get whenever they smoke just the THC plant, that CBD counteracts it.
I've
and like
heard
I
that.
mentioned before,
Yeah.
and like I mentioned before, Kevin, CBG is an agonist to the CB1 receptor, which is a psychoactive component. So if you mix some of these other alternative cannabinoids with the THC, it helps on a lot of different levels.
Mm-hmm. You hear that, folks? You're too high. Take a CBD gummy or smoke some CBD flower, and it'll level you out, right? I mean, that's really what it's doing.
Go.
It's pretty
What
amazing.
What are you cutting your weed with? CBD.
And the good thing is it's naturally in the plant already, so it's not like you're adding anything else to it,
Yeah.
Talk to me about the competition. I can't imagine how competitive the hemp market is. I mean, I kind of got a sense of it when I first dipped my toe into the cannabis industry. Before even the podcast, I took a stab at brokerage, right? Brokering hemp flower. And I quickly learned that, wow, like there's a lot of flower out there, right, that people are sitting on. It's kind of hard to sell. Everybody thought they'd make millions growing this plant. Obviously, that's probably not the case. I mean, or not as much of the case today, but you're competing against states all across the country, right? You're companies all across the country, as opposed to being regulated in one adult use state. So how are y'all, like, what's your strategy in that perspective in terms of marketing, brand awareness, like getting out there?
So that's a great question, Kevin. And what we're seeing right now is the market's just rushes towards where can they monetize, where's the most money. And in the the quote hemp market, it's a lot of people are spraying their flower with Delta 8, or they're selling Delta 8 or hemp derived psychoactive products, whereas we're more focused on, the natural plant, growing the alternative cannabinoids. So we don't have that many competitors in our space, and the few competitors that we do have that focus on high quality, we're collaborating with. And obviously we all got our own trade secrets and secret sauce and all that, but like there was someone that this year in the High Times Cup, they beat us. We got second, and they're a legit hemp grower. So our founder, very passionate cultivator and grower, super experienced. The first thing he did when he saw that they won, he reached out to him and had a good conversation with them. And now we're, open and doing collaborations with them. So I believe, and so does Eric, our founder, that, there's enough business out there for everybody. So as long as we just, stay in our lane, continue to grow brick by brick, remain profitable, then, we can have friendly competitors at the same time.
Right, right. What would you say is outside of obviously the quality and the way in which you go about your cultivation techniques, which we talked about earlier, is there any other standout differentiators, maybe from a marketing standpoint for FlowGardens, or anything else that really separates you from the competition?
We've grown through word of mouth.
That's huge. That's like the best, right? I mean,
yeah, and we love when those new orders come in and it says first time customer, and we're getting those consistently every day. So really, what we feel like stands out is just listening to all of our constituents or customers and industry peers on subs like on Reddit, and making sure that those people are educated and having them comment whenever they buy our flower and educate everybody else in the hemp space. That really kind of is the marketing for us.
That's awesome. Yeah. And you have a new brand advocate right here. I'll tell you, because I do often get asked, from older people asking, I just can't smoke that strong stuff. What else is there? Is CBD a good alternative? And I have a few suggestions here and there, but mostly on the edible side. Right. And so FlowGardens is a great solution for, smokable hemp that still gives you that same entourage effect, but not the intense, THC potency that you get elsewhere. So I totally get what you're saying there with word of mouth. It makes complete sense. What about the team? So it's important that everyone rows in the same direction, right? And so how do you go about, from a strategy perspective, building a team and culture around high quality standards and really everything that we've talked about that encompasses the FlowGardens brand?
Yeah, that this is my second business. So I was in a completely different industry for about 15 years, and I exited several years ago. But so I have some experience as far as how do you properly grow and scale a business, have the right culture in place, core values, things like that. And it really starts with just having a clear vision, and not just having that clear vision, which ours is Cultivating Health and Happiness, doing that through R&D and high quality cannabis, but really communicating that to the employees. So every day they're living and breathing what our core values are. And they know when we make decisions at the top, whether it's the board or the founder or, key employees, we're doing that to move the vision of FlowGardens forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is there any particular employee that you're really looking for in terms of like work ethic or the way in which they think about the business?
Our retention is really strong as far as our employees are concerned, and it is, there is a larger component of having blue collar employees in our industry. So there's that component which increases attrition in general. But one of the things that we look for are referrals from our employees. So if we're posting for a new position, whether that's a trimmer or cultivator or someone in our packaging room, the first thing we'll do is post that internally. why offer someone else a job if someone else in our company has been working hard? Maybe they want to move up or move laterally within the company. And then we'll accept referrals from interviews from other employees, and then we'll post it externally, if we need to.
Sure. That's great though, that you at least give, the opportunity to promote internally. And that I haven't seen that play out very much in the 10 years that I've been in traditional corporate environment, right? Like you either have to be in the same position for 10 years until you die in that position, or someone else dies that you get moved up, or you have to jump laterally, right? You have to go to another company to kind of get that bump in pay or that bump in leadership. So it's a great time in cannabis, right? Because these are all just different opportunities and new things that we can kind of do differently that the traditional industries have been doing in the past. So it's very exciting. What are you guys focused on for the remainder of this year and going into 2024?
Well, there's an update to the Farm Bill. It's done every several years, so we're really waiting to see what kind of guidance we're going to get there.
When does that come out?
I believe things can always change that we found. I believe it's going to be around September.
Okay.
Now when it has to be implemented by, maybe December or January 1st. I'm not quite sure on that, but we know there are things in the work, and I think it's going to come out somewhere around September.
So that's kind of a wait and see. That'll dictate kind of y'all's next move. It's business as usual right now until you see the new guidelines in place.
Yep, exactly.
Got you. Well, tell me, David, what haven't we touched on? I know we kind of ran through this, and you're very knowledgeable in this area, but is there anything that's top of mind for you that maybe we didn't discuss that you want to leave the audience with before we wrap up?
Yeah, I guess, Kevin, what I would like to know, and happy to take on it too, is knowing your listeners and what you're casting out there with Cannabinoid Connect. What do you think is most important to them? How, then maybe we've addressed it, maybe we haven't. Like, what do you think your listeners would want to hear, knowing that I'm a subject matter expert in our space, and they may not have access to do, or may not be able to find it just by Googling it?
It's a good question. I've never gotten that one thrown back at me.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I think that people are interested in what's next with cannabis. Like where does this go? Right. And it's super complex from someone on the outside, because just we talked about earlier, the definitions, you got marijuana designated, you got hemp, you've got cannabis, which is, overall talking about both. So I think what's top of mind for most people is just how is this industry going to shake out? Right. And what is it going to look like in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know one of the landmark things that happened was Colorado around 2016. And tons of states have it approved medicinally and recreationally now, like we mentioned, but it's hadn't even been 10 years since the Colorado reference I had. So, I mean, our industry is still in the infancy stage. So, whenever I kind of give a hard time to those people selling the 30% THC products, I understand. Like, that makes sense. People are excited because this plant has been liberated. It's been suppressed by, the government, for lack of better words, for so long. And, the reefer madness videos that our parents and grandparents were indoctrinated with. So, I would just urge your listeners and the consumers to just keep learning, because this plant, what you see in the stores, there's a lot more to come, and the market's going to continue to develop, to help the customer and help the consumer.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you can't blame the high potency THC. I know we kind of bashed on it a little bit, but it's expected, right? It's so new, it's so exciting. There's a huge appetite for it, so it's like, let's pump as much THC as we can get in this flower, right? And it's working. Yeah. And so we'll see how that evolves and shakes out over time. But I agree with you. It's exciting, and there's so much potential, right? And we haven't even scratched the surface of like the industrial side, right? Like the industrial hemp and all the products that can be made from the hemp plant, which we've kind of diverted from, right? In the past 100 years of prohibition. I mean, it wasn't uncommon 100 years ago, or even thousands of years ago, right? In Eastern culture, where we were making stuff out of this plant, right? Ropes and clothing and paper, and now fast forward, I mean, we have the potential for, I mean, I think there's jets that are using hemp seed oil as fuel, right? I mean, it's amazing stuff. Plastics for cars, hempcrete for houses. I mean, the list goes on and on. And when you look at it from the outside, I think it's pretty evident that, this plant has been illegal because they're protecting industry, right? I mean, overall, like this is a threat to major industries, and there's a lot of uses for it. So that's really what excites me, that discussion, and I think once we get past the stigma of THC, the bad boy cannabinoid, it's really going to open up even more conversations and dialogue, and I just can't wait to have those when that time comes.
Well, we appreciate you being a supporter and moving this entire industry and initiative forward as far as just consumer education goes. That's what we're focused on, Kevin. So thank you.
Well, hey, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you, because I couldn't do this podcast without expert guests on that are, on the front lines actually doing it. So, David, this has been a really great conversation. You're super knowledgeable in the space, and like again, I'm a huge fan of FlowGardens. I'll probably be going online here soon to order some for those people that I mentioned, my dad and some uncles, and just have them try it, because again, they're being a bit not pushed away, but they're a little hesitant because of how strong this stuff can be today. So David, thank you so much. Where can people find y'all's website, social media, if they want to learn more about FlowGarden's great products?
Yeah, Kevin, again, thanks for having me on the show, and for just being such a good supporter of our industry and talking us up. If you ever need anything from FlowGardens, just shoot me a note and we'll get you a special discount there. But
Thank you.
yeah, if anybody wants to check us out, just go to flowgardens.com. I would give our Instagram account, but we continually get shut down with AI bots and all that. So, I mean, you can probably find us on Instagram, but I would just say go to our website and check us out.
Yeah, the Instagram thing, man. I just read an article today. Wall Street Journal published that there's this, and this is totally off topic, but there's like this huge pedophilia like network that Instagram's allowing for. Like, it's like easy for pedophiles to get content and do things, which is just obscene, right? But yet they're cracking down so hard on cannabis. Like, you do one post that's not fitting their guidelines, which we don't know their guidelines at all. We have no framework around what we can post, what we can't. It's like they just kind of choose. And cannabis is every day. It's like, oh, thank God my account has been taken down, So Instagram, if you're listening, hey, stay away, like leave the cannabis operators alone. Okay. There's 23 states now, 22 states that are legal. We're almost half, and focus on some of these other larger issues that need addressing. So I'll put that disclaimer out for us, David.
That's great, Kevin. Thanks again for having me.
Of course. Yes. And thank you all for listening. Until next time. Bye.
3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.